Hello, this is Stephen R. Covey. I can hardly believe that it has been 20 years since we first published The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Since the book first hit stores in 1989, the 7 Habits book has sold more than 20 million copies, has been translated into 38 different languages, and was named as the #1 most influential business book of the 20th century. Our little consulting company called Covey Leadership has now grown from a handful of associates to become Franklin Covey, the global leader in effectiveness training for organizations, teams, and individuals in 123 countries around the world. The success that we have been blessed with is all based on aligning ourselves and our organization with foundational principles of effectiveness. We have learned by centering our lives on timeless, unchanging principles, we create fundamental paradigms or ways of thinking that helps us live our lives more effectively. Principles are the center that put all other areas of life in perspective. While we are free to choose our actions, we are not free to choose the consequences of those actions. Principles do. This video program will teach you what I call the foundational principles which the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People are built upon. In this program, you will see me teaching each of these foundational principles to various groups we have worked with over the past 20 years. While my hairstyle and looks may have changed these past 20 years, the principles of effectiveness have not changed, nor will they throughout all of man's existence. I hope you will pay close attention, take notes, and teach your loved ones what you will be learning. If you will learn and apply these principles in your life and the lives of your family, friends, and business associates, you too will experience the power of proven principles. In conclusion, just remember this. Everyone chooses one of 2 roads in life, whether they're young or old, rich or poor, men and women alike. One road is the broad, well-traveled road to mediocrity. The other, the road to greatness and meaning. The range of possibilities that exist within each of these 2 destinations is as wide as the diversity of gifts and personalities in the human family. But the contrast between the 2 destinations is as the night is to the day. I'm delighted to welcome each of you to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I believe that your involvement with this material can be one of the most exciting learning experiences of your life. The essential purpose of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is to learn how to lead your life in a truly effective way. To describe what the 7 Habits material is, let me share with you what it is not. It is not a quick fix program. It is not a program of the month. It is a process of personal and interpersonal growth and development that will require not only your continuing best efforts, but also your patience. As we all know, real growth and development cannot take place overnight. You must pay the price over an extended period of time to reap the benefits of these habits. Implementing the 7 habits will be an upward personal climb like a journey up a steep mountain. It won't be easy. It will be a challenge. As you ascend the mountain, so to speak, with this 7 habits material, you'll become acutely aware of the loose gravel, the loose rocks in your life. You may slip occasionally, maybe even fall back a time or 2. You will feel the gravity pull of old habits working against you. But I'll assure you, as you continue in your climb and endure in your efforts, you will begin to feel a level of exhilaration and of attaining entirely new heights in your life, higher and higher levels of effectiveness. By applying this effort, you can expect to increase your capacity to achieve your personal and professional goals and to develop better working relationships with your associates and all of your loved ones. In short, you can expect to become more effective. Let me suggest that the best way to get the most out of the 7 habits is to be very open-minded, to be open to self-discovery. Participate, really get involved. Look for ways to apply and to implement these habits in your life. You see, our habits form our character. You may have heard the quote, "Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny." For our purposes, we will define a habit as the intersection of knowledge, skill, and desire. You see, knowledge is the theoretical component. That is the what to do and the why to do it. Skill is the practical side of how to do it. And desire is the motivation side, the want to do it. In order to make something a habit in our lives, we literally must have all 3 components. Habits are powerful factors in our lives. They constantly express our character. They determine the level of our effectiveness or our ineffectiveness. In the words of an English poet, we first make our habits, then our habits make us. The 7 habits are simply common sense organized. But remember, what is common sense is not always common practice. So I encourage you to make the investment, put forth the time and effort. Focus on the kinds of changes you can make consistently and over time to develop these habits. The development of the 7 habits began with a study I completed in 1976. I wanted to study the success idea in America and how it evolved. So I got into the popular success literature going back for 200 years. This included many, many books, magazine articles, annotated bibliographies, summaries, reviews. I literally tapped into thousands and thousands of sources, either directly or indirectly. As I worked, I started to sense a pattern. As soon as I sensed this pattern, I looked for evidence of it, and the evidence was everywhere. The basic finding was this. For the first 150 years, almost the entire focus of the literature was on character, on principles, on what we might call the character ethic. Attributes such as integrity, fidelity, courage, compassion, contribution, responsibility, justice. These findings became the basis for writing the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then, because of many, many societal forces, the emphasis gradually shifted in the early 1900s, particularly in the 20s and the 30s, away from the character ethic to what we might call the personality ethic, which focused more on techniques than on principles. You are probably familiar with many books that illustrate the literature of the personality ethic. They basically deal with how to take care of yourself, how to look good, how to dress in particular ways, how to create the right image. In other words, the personality ethic focuses on how to appear to be rather than on how to actually be. Many of these techniques have real merit. However, if they don't have their roots in the character ethic, if they don't have their roots in principles, they won't have the power to create enduring effectiveness. For example, what if people learn techniques of influencing others, but they're fundamentally duplicitous or deceitful in their character? What if they really wanted to use people to build their own economic success? They might develop smoothness in their relationships so that they can have their own personal ends achieved, money, fame, glory, whatever. They really couldn't care less about contribution or service, purpose, adding value, helping others. How much trust would you have in them? How willing would you be to follow them or to rely upon them when things get tough? You know, one time I had a student come to me and say, "How am I doing in your class?" I looked him in the eye and said, "You really know how you're doing, don't you? A lot better than I do. How are you doing?"
And he kind of looked down squeamishly. Well, not too good, I guess. I just had kind of a rough time lately, and maybe I haven't applied myself as much as I should have. You really came to find out how well you'd psyched me out, how well you'd psyched out the system, isn't that right? When in fact, you kind of know in your heart how you're doing. Well, how am I doing, he said. How are you doing? Let's focus on what's really happening, not on what's appearing to happen. You see, this whole personality ethic with its technique focus is like the tip of an iceberg. The tip, or that part which is seen on the surface by others. It's above the water. The character ethic is like the great mass of the iceberg under the water. People often do no work in the foundation where the great mass is, where the greatest long-term impact is. Too many people give all their energy and focus to the tip of the iceberg. That is, to learning techniques that others can see. You see this even in organizations, not just individuals. You see, programs change. Practices change. Principles do not change. If we help individuals and organizations to internalize principles, they will know how to adapt the practices to address specific situations. Let me emphasize that techniques have their place. They're very important. I really mean that. I mean, you want good human relations techniques, public relations techniques, communication techniques, management techniques. But when we use techniques to cover our own lack of character, they become manipulative. They undermine trust and confidence. You see, what we really need is the character ethic. And that's essentially what the 7 Habits is about. This material is based on an inside-out approach, meaning we give our first energies to our own character development before we focus on techniques or how to be more effective with others. Gandhi beautifully demonstrated this principle once. A mother came to him and said, "Would you help my child reduce the amount of sugar he is eating?" Gandhi paused, thought, and answered, "Well, talk to me in a week." A week later, the mother asked him again, and he talked to the boy, and the boy agreed. And the mother said, "Why didn't you talk with him last week?" Gandhi smiled and said, "You don't understand. Last week, I too was eating sugar." Unless we work on our character, we will not develop trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is built by the combination of both character and competency. We could have all of the ability in the world, but if we don't have the basic character to be reliable, to take responsibility, others will soon learn to distrust us. They're fearing that we're just trying to meet our own ends, perhaps at their expense. In my opinion, unless we return to the character ethic, we won't have the basic foundation of trustworthiness. That's what leads to trust, which is needed to build effective interpersonal relationships. In the final analysis, what we are communicates far more eloquently than anything we say or do. I love the quote of Henry David Thoreau. "For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root." In other words, let's work primarily on the roots to begin with and build a foundation of trustworthiness. This is one of the key areas of focus in the 7 Habits, to build character and competence and to restore trustworthiness and trust in our lives, in the lives of our families, our organizations. Trust and trustworthiness really are the basis of personal and interpersonal leadership. It's the foundation of all true effectiveness. Now, before I go into the habits, I would like to stand back and look at the basic structure, the basic framework of the 7 Habits as a whole. You see, they're organized in a particular way for a reason. They're all interrelated. In fact, the relationships and the sequence among the habits are the key to their overall power. To help us visualize the sequential and progressive nature of the 7 habits, I'd like to use a simple diagram I call the Maturity Continuum. Maturity refers to a process leading to growth and development, and continuum refers to the continuous, incremental nature of growth and progression. If you were to see a maturity continuum line from low maturity to high maturity, there would be 3 basic levels to it. The first level is dependence. The second level is independence. And the third and the highest level is interdependence. Let me define these 3 terms very briefly. Dependence basically means you need others to get what you want. You see, all of us began life as an infant, dependent on others for nurturing and sustenance. I may be intellectually dependent on other people's thinking. I may be emotionally dependent on other people's affirmation and validation of me. Dependence is the attitude of you. You take care of me. You come through for me. Or you don't come through. I blame you for the results. Independence basically means you are pretty much free from the external influence, the control, and the support of others. You think, you act for yourself. You're validated from within. You're inner-directed. You're self-reliant. You get what you want through your own effort. Like dependence, it is possible to be independent in various areas, physically, financially, intellectually, emotionally, while not being independent in other areas. Independence is the attitude of I. I can do it. I am responsible. I am self-reliant. I can choose. True independence of character empowers us to act rather than to be acted upon. It frees us from our dependence on circumstances and other people. It is the avowed goal of many individuals and also many social movements to enthrone independence as the highest level of achievement. But it is not the ultimate goal in effective living. There is a far more mature, more advanced level. The third and highest level in the maturity continuum is interdependence. If people were interdependent, what would they be? They would be very much like a marriage, a family, an executive team where they need to cooperate together in order to accomplish what I want, what you want, what we want together. In fact, we live in an interdependent reality. Interdependence is essential for good leaders, good team players, for success in marriage, for family life, and organizations. Interdependence is the attitude of we. We can cooperate. We can be a team. We can combine our talents, our abilities, our best efforts to achieve our highest success. Now here is the basic insight. Think on this. Until you and I are independent, we cannot be interdependent. Let me say that again. Until you and I are independent, we cannot be interdependent. In other words, we can't do calculus before we understand algebra. We can't run before we learn to walk. We neither can learn to work cooperatively with other people if we don't have internal self-mastery. That's why the first 3 habits, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and put first things first, deal with self-mastery, self-control, self-dominion. They form the deepest part of our character. They constitute what I call the private victory, the victory over self. You see, private victories must precede public victories. To lead others effectively, we first must be able to lead ourselves effectively. For example, when I make a commitment to get up early and exercise, and I literally carry it out, I feel better. I feel better about myself. I have greater emotional strength. I have better physical energy. You see what that means? A private victory. As a result, I do better in all my relationships with others. That's the public victory. However, have you ever noticed the tendency to be irritable with others after failing to keep a commitment to yourself? I know, speaking for myself, I can usually trace my weaknesses, my failures in dealing with others to some flaw, some failure to win my own private victory. These first three habits lead us from dependence to independence. Then once people have control over themselves and have a measure of independence, they're ready to deal with the next three habits. Think win-win. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, and synergize, all of which helps us in our relationships with others, enabling us to be successful with people. Habits 4, 5, and 6 develop what I call the public victory, effectiveness with others. It's based on teamwork, on cooperation, and communication. Habits 4, 5, and 6 utilize our personality. They're more skill-based, and they lead us from independence to interdependence. That is the attitude of we, where we cooperate to accomplish desired results. Then habit 7, sharpen the saw, is the habit of renewal, of regular, balanced renewal in all of the dimensions of our life. It surrounds and encompasses all of the other habits. It is the habit of continuous improvement that creates an upward spiral of growth and development. Now, interdependence is a choice that only independent people can make. For instance, let's say you're my supervisor and I'm very dependent upon your opinion of me. I'm also dependent financially and intellectually upon you. But let's say you have some blind spots in your performance and you really need feedback. I'm aware of your blind spots. I also have enough skill to give you feedback. But would I do it? I wouldn't. I'm too dependent upon you. I'm too angry at you. I'm mad because those blind spots hurt me. I have what's often called a love-hate relationship. You see, the person you're dependent upon also controls you. If you don't get what you want, it makes you mad. So I wouldn't possibly give you honest feedback. I don't want to rupture my relationship with you. So what do? I talk to others, and then they share their experiences, and they validate me, and we badmouth you. We're simply not interdependent. If I were truly interdependent, that means if I'm first of all independent, I could go to you and I could say, could we have a visit? I would like to share some of my concerns. But if you were dependent yourself and used to borrowing strength from your position power, you might try to intimidate me. You might say, well, what is it, Stephen? Let's get to it right now. What are your concerns? On the other hand, if I'm emotionally and intellectually independent from you, I could be courageous and kind at the same time. I'm patient. I don't give up, but I don't give in. I could say, we need a little more time where we're not going to be interrupted. Let's do it at our mutual convenience. You would sense that you're dealing with a person of integrity, of power, of strength, of courage. You would also know from my professional development opportunities and the way I have exercised them, I've got about 10 other jobs I could go to at any time. You probably also know I'm the only one in your crew that isn't bad-mouthing you. I have no need to badmouth. I have no energy around your weaknesses. I don't want to do something to hurt you. I want to do something to help you, to overcome your weaknesses, or perhaps help you compensate for the deficiency in some way. So I'm most positive person on your entire team. I'm almost indispensable to you. Now, the first three habits develop that kind of strength, courage, and capacity. The next three habits help me know how to work effectively with you so that my strength does not intimidate you. I can empathize with you. I can read the needs of the situation and figure out the best way to make the presentation so that the two of us can cooperate together and solve the problem. You would see me as the best source of problem solving on your entire team. Interdependence is where real freedom is. That's where excitement is. That's where adventure is. Their very best comes to the fore. That's the maturity continuum, the adventure of building powerful, interdependent relationships, interdependent teams. I'm going to attempt to give a brief overview of each of the habits. It's like getting a kind of airplane view of the whole mountain range before we go down to explore the detail. Habit 1, be proactive, basically means that your life is a product of your values, not your feelings. That your life, or the organization's life, is a product of your decisions, not your conditions. The opposite of being proactive is to be reactive, which basically means that your life is a function of your feelings, your moods, your impulses, other people's treatment. The underlying principle of habit 1, be proactive, is to take responsibility. The concept is you and I have the capacity to choose our response. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind, basically means that all things are created twice, and habit 2 is the first creation. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind, means that you get a mental image, a picture of where you want to end up in this meeting, in this relationship, this year, in your life. To a company, it is the vision it has of its future. It is the creation of that vision. Habit 2 is based on the principle of vision, of purpose, of meaning, of mission. Habit 3, to put first things first, is the second creation. To put first things first means you decided what the first things were in habit 2. Now you have the discipline and the commitment to keep them first. The opposite of putting first things first is to put second or third or fourth things first. That's why many people really deeply value their family relationships, their health, their personal integrity. But they get caught up in the powerful social value systems, timetables, and agendas of their culture. Never question it, so that the first creation has already been done for them, done to them in the form of programs, scripts that they never question. Then they get on this ladder of success, and they arrive at the top rung, only then to realize the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. They come to realize that no one on their deathbed ever wished they'd spent more time at the office. As Goethe put it, things which matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. Habit 4, think win-win, is the habit of mutual benefit. The underlying paradigm or principle is abundance. There is plenty out there and to spare. So you don't have to be threatened by the strengths of other people. You can nurture competency around you higher than your own. It doesn't threaten you. You can share knowledge. You can share recognition, gain, profit. The opposite is scarcity, not abundance. It's like a piece of pie. There's only so much. If you get the recognition, I may not get it. If I share gain or profit with you, we will have less. Habit 4, to think win-win, comes from the principle of abundance, not scarcity, meaning the pie gets larger and larger and larger.
Habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood, is the habit of empathic communication, meaning you always seek to understand first. The teacher diagnoses, pre-assesses before teaching. The doctor diagnoses before prescribing. The attorney does discovery before developing his or her own case or brief. Understand first before you seek to be understood, before you seek to contribute, before you take action, before you have the basis for judgment. Habit 6, synergize, is the habit of creative cooperation, seeking to understand. We create something that was not there before. That takes high levels of cooperation. The principle behind habit 6 is the principle that 1 plus 1 can equal 3, 4, 10, 20, 1,000. It's the principle of putting two boards together that are stronger in total than adding the sum of the boards separate. It's the principle of valuing differences, not tolerating differences, not accepting differences, celebrating differences. Habit 7 is called sharpen the saw. It is the principle of renewal, the principle of continuous learning, continuous improvement, getting better constantly. It's based on the principle that we have the capability of charging our own battery. The opposite of habit 7, sharpen the saw, is to just let the blade get dull, to let the mind atrophy, to let the body lose its tone and its vitality through junk food and no exercise and trying to live a life of hedonism, pleasure-seeking, rather than one of contribution and service. It renews each of the other 6 habits. Now, simply, the 3-person process is this. The best way to learn something is to teach it. How many have learned that? How many have learned that when you really teach is when you really learn? In 5 minutes, you will be teaching what I'm teaching you in the next 5 minutes. See yourself now as a teacher. I'm going to briefly describe the 3-person process and the 4 benefits that come from the 3-person process. Now, notice your behavior right now. See, you don't see yourself as a kind of passive learner. You see yourself as an active teacher. You're just preparing to teach. And that significantly increases your learning. That is the first benefit. The first person teaches. The second person first captures, understands, then evaluates to see if it makes sense, thinks about application, and then teaches the third person. Then that person teaches another person. This way you can take material and cascade it through an entire organization. Second benefit. When you teach, you significantly increase the likelihood of application. For instance, if you're teaching people to be better listeners, isn't it probable that you'll try to be a better listener yourself? See, the real most foundational learning comes from doing. Teaching may give you more intellectual understanding, but the internalization of the ideas comes in the application of those ideas. That's even a higher level of learning. Third benefit. When you teach, you significantly improve communication. Notice the 3-person process there. Why do you think communication would be significantly improved? Notice the first person teaches, and what does the second person do?
first captures or understands before evaluating. What is the number one obstacle in the field of communication? People do not listen. They do not capture accurately. They evaluate while they're listening. But if people are trained to capture accurately, completely, before they judge, you can listen for purpose, main points, how each point is proven or validated, how each point is illustrated or applied, and value. The fourth benefit. When these things happen I'm talking about, it is very bonding to the relationship. The relationship gets steeper and stronger. Why? There's so much authenticity. There's so much sincerity. There is so much empathy and creativity being manifested in the communication processes. When you do this with your children, you will learn better. The next time you send somebody to a convention, to some training activity, to some association meeting, before they go, what do you say to them? When you return, you will have the privilege of distilling the essence of what you learned to the assembled staff for half an hour. You'll find they'll attend the meeting sober. They'll take notes. From the moment you give that assignment, they will be in sweat city. Seriously, they'll go to work. All 8 cylinders will go to work. It's the single most powerful thing I have ever learned in the field of education. Use the 3-person process and you will double, quadruple the impact. And you will see those 4 benefits happen. It's the essence of the process that we use, the 3-person process. When we get into the 7 Habits material, we have to realize that it is all based upon principles, upon natural laws. That is why we are presenting this foundational material first. We need to understand the concept of a principle and the concept of a paradigm, and also how to define effectiveness. Then we'll look at the 7 habits. I suggest that principles are not only natural laws, objective, factual, external to ourself. I suggest they are also self-evident. How would we know that? We have found that if you can get enough people interacting freely and synergistically who are informed, all the value systems are the same. We find that regardless of one's background, religion, culture, nationality, race, gender, regardless of the level in the organization, regardless of the industry or the profession, the same underlying values are universal. They represent what we could call principles. There is consensus that surrounds them, such as integrity, service, contribution, the growth and development of people, kindness, how you treat people, dignity, fairness. These are universals. Every one of the habits represents a principle, a fundamental natural law that is self-evident. Now, let me just give an illustration of the difference between a social value and principles. It was a dark and stormy night. Captain, 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 wake up. What is it? Sorry to awaken you, sir, but we have a serious problem. And we've tried to solve it and can't. What's the problem? There's a ship in our sea lane about 20 miles away that refuses to move. Well, what do you mean they refuse? Just tell them to move. We have, sir. That's the problem. They won't respond. I'll tell them. The signal goes out. Move starboard 20 degrees. The signal comes back. Move starboard 20 degrees yourself. What arrogance. Who is this guy? He doesn't know who I am. Let him know a captain is giving the command. The signal goes out. This is Captain Horatio Hornblower, the 16th. Move starboard 20 degrees at once. The signal comes back. This is Seaman Carl Jones, the 3rd. Move starboard 20 degrees at once yourself. This is a command. A seaman commanding me, a captain. I can't believe this. What is going on? Let him know who I am. We're a battleship. We could just blow them out. The signal goes out. This is the mighty Missouri, flagship of the 7th Fleet. Signal returns. This is the lighthouse. You see, lighthouses are like principles. We don't break them. We break ourselves against them. This is why humility is the mother of all other virtues. Openness, teachability, humility, awareness of external realities. If you can cultivate that and apply it with other people, you'll change the whole nature of the culture. It'll become a principle-centered culture, not one driven by social values. I had a friend of mine who said, our company is value-driven. I said, every company is value-driven. Hitler was value-driven. The question is, are the values in alignment with principles? That is a humbling question. Are my values and my habits in alignment with principles, with natural laws? Now, when principles and values are aligned, then you could use the words interchangeably. You could call it values or principles. It would make no difference. So you don't want to get hung up semantically on the difference. But if they are not aligned, then it's better to see what the principle is and what the established value is, and then work here to align it. It's constantly an effort to understand principles. The law of gravity. Gradually, the whole world has come to accept that. The apple falling out of the tree and hitting the scientist's head. Simple observation. The law of gravity governs. What if you had a legislature trying to repeal the law of gravity? A principle is the actual reality, like the law of gravity, the way things are. How many here, when you were in school, did a lot of cramming? Be honest now. How many got really good at it? How many here have ever worked on the farm? Ever cram on the farm? I don't mean just work hard at the end to bring in the harvest. I mean, forget to plant in the spring, flake off all summer, and then really work hard in the end to bring in the harvest. Well, it's patently foolish. We know that. Why? Because a farm is a natural system and is governed by what? Principles or social values? Principles. What about the development of our mind? What would you say? Social values or principles? The development of the mind, not the getting of a degree. You can't fake it. The development of the mind is based on principles, the law of the harvest, not on social values, however popular. What about the body? What would you say? Social values or principles? Our health, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, is governed by the law of the harvest, by principles, not by social values. Now let's have just a little fun for a second. You look strong and healthy, and I'm sure he'll pass the test. Okay, now what we want are 20 straight back push-ups. If you get into the push-up position, please. Okay. All right, we're going to cheer you on.
We're going to count for you, too.
There's some Army guys back there.
Now, those people are keeping the peace. Okay, let's go ahead and start. We'll count and cheer you on.
How many am I doing?
Just 20. Straight back. All the way down.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Thank you. No purpose, just a little fun. I sat next to him at lunch, and we looked at this cheesecake out in front.
I ate it.
You ate it? Told you you'd live with the consequences. Everything that I've been talking about is not easily achievable. It takes continuous effort. You can't fake, for instance, the ability to do 20 push-ups. You can't fake it. You have to pay the price. Next time I come back, he literally, I'm convinced, could do 25, even 50. But he'd have to pay a price to do it. It stirs up an awareness that we're dealing with realities out there, particularly principles that ultimately will govern. We are not in control. See, the traditional concept is get in control. We are not in control. Principles control. We control our actions, but the consequences that flow from those actions are controlled by principles. As Abraham Lincoln once put it, people will pass away, but principles never will. They endure. This is why we believe so much in the Eastern statement, give a man a fish, you feed him for the day. Teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. See, even though you may teach someone a practice, always try to teach the principle which underlies it, because the situation may change and the practice no longer applies. But the principle will be constant. Principles are universal natural laws, self-evident, self-validating. They govern. Ultimately, values don't govern. Principles ultimately govern. A paradigm comes from the Greek root paradigma. It basically means a pattern, a model, a representation, something that stands for something else. It comes from the mental image you have in your mind of the way things are out there. And the images we carry in our heads of the way things are, of reality, come basically from our own backgrounds, our own experiences. All of us think we see the world as it is. In fact, we see the world as we are. We project onto the outside world, our environment, the people we associate with, including how we see ourselves. We project out of our own conditioning experiences, our background, a certain representation, a certain model, a certain set of expectations, a certain assumption on that reality out there. And we think that's the way it is. I might describe myself or you or a situation as if I am describing it as it is.
In fact, I am describing myself. That is, my perceptions, my frame of reference, my worldview, my value system, my autobiography. And I'm projecting it upon the outside. Now let me give a very simple layman's way of looking at a paradigm. It is a map, like a map of this hotel, or a map, let's say, of Portland. I'll ask this gentleman. What would you do if you came here to Portland and you have no information at all about this place, and you were given a map where you rented the car, and it was a map of Seattle, but on the top it said Portland? What would you do? So you don't know otherwise. You've never been here, you have no other source of information.
I would hopefully ask for a little bit more direction other than just what's on that map. Maybe have them start me out.
Okay, the person at the desk said, "Sorry, sir, that's all we have, and it's late at night. Good luck to you. Here's the keys to your car. It's right across the street. It's in number 14. And if you'll follow this map, you'll be able to find this hotel that you want to get to." Okay, now just assume that you call your buddy here up on the phone, and he knows that you've got that map, and he says to you, what's your first name?
Keith.
Keith, try harder. You're tired. So now you double your speed. What's going to happen?
I'm going to get nowhere twice as fast.
You call him back in a state of total despair and discouragement, and you say to him, "I have never been so confused and so lost in my life, and I am following this map to the hilt. And I have doubled my speed. I'm lost twice as fast." He senses you're discouraged. You read it down. You're almost ready to give up. It's despairing. And he says to you, "Think positively." He gets you just jazzed right out of your gourd. I mean, he says, "You can do this thing, rise to the occasion. Do it." I do it.
That'll do it.
Now you don't even care you're lost, right?
That's right. I'm happy lost.
That's what a paradigm is. You see, a paradigm is the map you have in your mind. Once you have an accurate map, then your behavior and your attitude matter. See, what we call maps are usually assumptions of the way things are. Assumptions of the way things are represent just, that's what reality is. You don't question that. I remember I was giving a speech a little while back, and there was someone on the front row just constantly talking to another person. And my mother was 2 rows behind, and she was so upset that here her precious son was being so ignored, so blatantly, so openly, constantly, and would not end. From the very moment I began to the end of my speech, just constant talking. And it just totally discombobulated her own listening, and she felt like taking her purse and reaching 2 rows ahead. Anyway, she went up afterwards to the person that was running the conference, and, "Did you see that? Did you see what was happening? Can you believe that right there on the front row that..." "Yeah, I know. She's Korean. That's her translator." I was on a subway, very, very large metropolitan city. Sunday morning, it's quiet, sedate. Bunch of young kids run into the subway. Father follows. He sits near me. The kids just go crazy on that subway, running up and down, turning people's papers aside, just
raucous and rude. I'm sitting there, oh, I can't believe this. He does nothing. Now look at my attitude, see? Attitude, you try to control. But look what I could see. After a few minutes, attitude went into behavior. Sir, do you think you could control your children a little? They're very upsetting to people. Oh, yeah. He lifted his head as if to come to an awareness of what was happening. Yeah. I don't know. I just guess I should. We just left the hospital. Their mother died just about an hour ago, and I guess they don't know how to take it, and frankly, I don't either. Imagine the paradigm shift that took place there. Imagine now what the attitude and the behavior would be based upon that paradigm. Can you see why paradigms are deeper than attitude or behavior? And you know, even though we're talking here in personal and interpersonal ways, the same thing takes place throughout our whole society. Thomas Kuhn, in his brilliant book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, points out so powerfully and consistently all of the significant breakthroughs were breakwiths, old ways of thinking. Einstein, who rewrote physics, he made this brilliant statement: these significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. You see, it causes us to be reflective and introspective, to explore our own paradigms. Most people focus upon behavior and upon attitude. And both of those are, of course, very important. But far more fundamental than either behavior or attitude is a paradigm. How many of you here have ever been to the crazy mirror room in the carnival? Well, what if that was the only source of information you had on your body? This weird caricature. I mean, it showed me without any hair, if you can believe it. See, most people's self-maps are a function of the social mirror. They live out of the social mirror and their memory. A mother the other day said to me, I cannot believe my child. All of a sudden she turns 17 and she's like a different person. I have never seen anyone so uncooperative, so rebellious, so angry, so unwilling to do anything to help us at home, or to even be open to influence at all. Now, what is happening to the map or the paradigm in her head? And what do you do when you have that? You act upon it. That is the image that you have in your head of this person. It's the map you have of this person. Now, someone could say to you, just as I did here, try harder. Try to be more positive. But as long as a person carries that map, that image of this other person in their head, they're going to treat them that way. As soon as they treat them that way, the tendency is for people to respond accordingly. It's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. People live up to the social mirror that surrounds them. Now, I said to this mother, notice how you see your daughter. Well, it's not how I see her, it's the way she is. Potentially, is she capable of so much more? Oh yes, I know that. Why don't you see her in terms of her potential? Is not her potential part of the reality of her life? Isn't it really the larger part? Where the present manifestation, as she goes through, say, the emotional ups and downs of her teenage so-called identity crisis, you could live out of your imagination.
And out of a map, a paradigm, a view based upon her potential, which you deeply really believe in. Yeah, but what do I do with all this behavior and the totally unwillingness to cooperate, to do her part? Observe your paradigm. Observe the map you have of her. I remember I was in a situation like that. One of our teenage sons, just between the grade school and junior high, was just not performing. He wasn't adequate in any area. Athletically, people would fall apart with laughter watching. Almost swinging the bat before the ball was pitched. Academically, not only wouldn't do well on tests, couldn't even begin to take them. Socially, sometimes very embarrassing. Now look at the evidence we have. And Sandra and I, my wife, would talk about this. Well, maybe every family deserves their one. But we cared about this boy, and we were very worried. And I remember one time talking about this same subject in Armonk, New York. And I was talking about a study which opened up the whole field of what's called the self-fulfilling prophecy, where a computer in England called the bright group dumb, essentially. Here's the teachers. It's the bright group over here. You've got 120, 130 IQ. They love education. They love learning. You'll really enjoy them. This group here, you can kind of tell when you just look at their faces. This group, they're very fine people too. But they don't have the same candle power, and you have to respect that. Now notice what's happening. I'm talking as if I'm describing reality, right? This is the way they are. And they buy it. And they act on it for a period of several months. In other words, it becomes their view, their paradigm. But you know what? Several months later, they discovered there was a computer mistake of some kind, and the two groups were switched. They immediately tested, without telling anything to anybody. This group here went up something like 18 points. This group went down 14 points. The self-fulfilling prophecy. Our self-maps, our self-paradigms, are so much a function of the social mirror. A reversal based upon expectancy, paradigms, the mental representation, the maps held by these people. That is the significance of paradigms. And you notice how behavior and attitude flow out of how you see. Well, anyway, I was literally teaching this like I'm teaching you right now. And in my mind, I was thinking of my boy. Is it possible that the problem is in my paradigm? That the problem is with me, not my boy? Well, I talked with my wife when I returned home from that trip, and I said, I'm just wondering if the social mirror from you and I are not major contributors to these difficulties and these problems, this lack of ability to cope. We found that we were to some degree trying to get social mileage out of our kids' good behavior. See, that was part of our motive, of what people thought of us about our children. We liked the way they would speak well of us because of the performance of our children. We worried what would happen if they didn't live up to it. We see what we seek. So we explored our motives and said, this is not what we seek. We began to see him differently. As a person precious in his own right, not to be compared with anyone else, not to get into the social mirror of comparison against timetable, social agenda. He could easily be a late bloomer with tremendous potentialities that does not test out well in some areas. We don't know. It's just a whole big area of potential. And we were trained to put labels upon it. You see what I mean by the tendency is to project out of our own experiences, like a home movie, to project it onto someone else and to label. But we never explored our own motive. We never became reflective and introspective. Things were going well with the others, but all of a sudden, something threw us out of our standard operating procedure, and we couldn't just easily gloss over by psyching him up with PMA stuff. Come on, think positively. You know, keep your eye on the ball when it comes now. All right, now, then you swing. That's okay, son, don't worry about it. Get off his back, you know. You made mistakes. Okay, you're all fine, son. Then privately we talk with each other, see, oh, what have we got here? Duplicitous, unprincipled, as if he had no intrinsic merit and worth. That was the hardest part of the therapy, was dealing with self, exploring our own paradigms, loosening them up. But when you try to have people, to possess them, to own them, and to have their performance reflect on your reputation, your basic motive structure drives the paradigm of how you see that person, because you'll see them through this social mirror frame of reference. And then you get into the self-fulfilling prophecy. Hopefully, our humility, our willingness to surface the assumptions we make about life and to challenge them has been stirred up, particularly when it comes to our maps of ourself, of our loved ones, of our boss, of our work associates, of other people. And then, out of that humility, to say to the other person, how do you see it? What is your view? What is your perspective? What is your frame of reference? What is your opinion? And you constantly get a better sense of the way things are. You get a better and better paradigm. The 7 habits of highly effective people. Highly effective. Not mediocre effectiveness. Not low-level effectiveness. High effectiveness. Quantum leaps in effectiveness. What do we mean by effectiveness? What is effectiveness? We could use the word success, you know, but that word carries so much of the old social value connotation of having it all. That's why we use the word effectiveness. 7 habits of highly effective people. You know about Aesop and his famous tales about this poor farmer, you know, really down on his luck. And the farmer visits his favorite goose. And he notices one day there is a large egg, a golden egg, by the side of that goose. He thinks someone has tricked him, so he throws it away. Second thought, he decides to test it and finds out, indeed, it is pure gold. Pure gold. And he's been so poor for so long. And the next day, another one. And the next day, another one. Every day, there's another golden egg. He becomes so wealthy, so fabulously wealthy, but he also becomes very impatient and very greedy. He wants them all. He wants them all now. So he kills that goose, reaches inside to get them all, and of course finds none. Now, in that little fable is the essence of the definition of effectiveness. It's made up basically of 2 things. Getting what you want, and second, getting what you want in a way that enables you to get what you want again and again and again. We call it the PPC balance. P stands for production of desired results. PC stands for production capability. In other words, the capability of the asset to continue to produce the results. You can apply this to any field of human endeavor, any field. How many here have had a PPC imbalance with regard to the way you take care of your physical assets? Your car, your lawnmower. How many sometimes just run that over and over and not properly maintain? How many have had that experience? Why? It takes time to give attention, time and money to attend to PC, production capability. And people who are in a rush and who want what they want now, they'll go ahead and just run that machine or that car with no thought to its maintenance. Really, no PC attention at all. Eventually, no more golden eggs. The goose dies. Let me ask you what you would do if you were in a situation inside a company. You're in charge of this machine. The machine is producing well. And you want to really impress those people upstairs with the way you can produce. And there's very quick upward mobility. So you're really only interested in short-term production results. What would you do with that machine?
Put it into high gear.
High gear.
Run it over hours.
Run it all the time. No PC, no maintenance. Why? That's downtime. That's costs. Just keep that baby running constantly. More and more and more golden eggs. Now you're promoted because there is such quick upward mobility. The growth is just enormous in that organization. Then the next new manager of the machine comes on the scene. By this time, the machine is broken down because of no PC. So he's got to do PC work, maintenance work, repair work. So his costs go like this, and his production goes like this. My cost went like this, and my production went like that. I wrote black ink, he wrote red ink. So what do we say about my successor?
It's a bum.
Yeah, what a loser. Really. I mean, while you were there, profitable. As soon as you left, unprofitable. What about our bodies? How many here have the regular practice of a good exercise program? How many know you should? Well, ultimately, what will happen? Immune system could be weakened, make you vulnerable to all kinds of other diseases. What about the mind? What about the development of the mind? Constant learning. You can become so obsolete so fast if you don't pay the price on a daily basis to stay abreast of your own field and at least some working conceptual knowledge of how that relates to the other fields out there. Can you see why effectiveness with oneself, with body, mind, and spirit is a PC balance? With any physical assets, with even financial assets? How many have gone for the golden eggs from time to time in your life where you started to spend the principal instead of the interest? How many have ever done that? That is, you want to live a little higher on the hog, so you dip into the principal, the fund, see, the investment, rather than living on the interest, so that you can have more of what you want now. The whole idea of denying yourself, of subordinating it, of the discipline it takes to save before you spend, instead of to spend and then be forced to save. And that can then be a seedbed to other human interaction problems, or to in-law problems, or any other tender, sensitive areas. That's when you start to realize the goose has died, or is dying. It's sick. The same thing in a marriage relationship. You may have A situation like I saw a while back with the Young Presidents Organization and their families. Very successful person. Went from nothing to worth hundreds of millions of dollars and had a totally bankrupt family. And the question was asked, was this person truly successful? To use our language, effective? Well, in the business sense, maybe you'd say yes. But in the total sense, in terms of what really matters on one's deathbed, you'd probably say no. PC production capability was utterly neglected in the marriage or in the family. Can you see why effectiveness at home is a PC balance? What about business? What happens when you neglect the PC of business? Say with a customer. Think.
You lose that customer.
Okay.
Lose that customer. That customer is going to tell others, and then you're going to lose everyone that she or he has influence over.
It's why you cannot afford to lose a customer. Without any question, the most powerful advertising is word of mouth. People just accept it like that. That doesn't mean that you just give the customer everything. It means that you try to create a win-win situation so that on balance, what the customer wants and your capacity to keep producing for that customer, your PC, is in alignment and they're balanced together. I remember a clam chowder house that literally was so popular that you could hardly get near the place from about 11 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock. People would not only buy it for their lunch, they would buy a big bucket of it for their dinner and take it home. It was so good. It was just so popular. New management came in. No one knew about the change of management. Same name and everything else, but they watered down the clam chowder. Now, the bottom line, guess what happened for a month or so? It just zoomed like this. Why? They save all that cost, all that expense and the quality put into the clam chowder. But eventually, it liquidated the loyalty of their customer base. Liquidated it, little by little. The goose died. They tried to recover it, but by that time, there was a violation that had taken place with the public. Many would not even go back. They didn't trust him anymore. They wouldn't even believe those who said it was the same clam chowder as before. They felt violated. It's so often the case in human organizations that you can liquidate human resources by practices that focus on desired results, production of desired results, but neglects production capability. What about the employee who serves the customer? How can you neglect the PC with that person? Cut out training, cut out institutional advertising, cut out research and development, any form of people development. I mean, you can just about double, quadruple the bottom line of any organization you want by cutting out PC. And for a quarter or two, what's it going to look like? Well, look at the golden egg just absolutely raking in. Always treat your people exactly as you want them to treat your finest customers. And they will. In most cases, they will. It's a fundamental principle of PC in business. Focus on every stakeholder and ask, how well is the relationship with this stakeholder sustaining the capacity to produce what we want from that stakeholder, whether it be a supplier, the community, the environment out there, distributors, dealers, as well as the obvious stakeholders of customers, owners, and employees. You really have to ask that question. The ultimate PC balance is to fight to increase the economic well-being and quality of life of all stakeholders. You neglect one stakeholder, it will have a negative domino effect upon all the rest. That's why this PC balance is so foundational. Now I'd like to introduce you to a concept called the emotional bank account. You know what a financial bank account is. If you were my banker and I were to make many, many deposits into this bank account, it would gradually get larger and larger. I could even take withdrawals from it, but I have great reserve capacity. An emotional bank account is like that as well. You could make many, many deposits over a period of time, which would build my reserve capacity with you. If I make a mistake, that is a small withdrawal. And the trust is so high, I still have a huge reserve capacity. If I make a huge mistake that violates, in the deepest sense, our agreement, it may cause the emotional bank account to be overdrawn all at one time, see? The concept of the emotional bank account is the production capability side of human relationships, of human interaction. Now, any metaphor, if pushed far enough, will tend to break down, including this one. You don't make deposits in order to take withdrawals. Nevertheless, if you have a high emotional bank account, if the quality of that relationship is so good and the trust is so high, you can, in fact, make mistakes. You can take withdrawals. Not on purpose, but often unwittingly, unknowingly, because of insensitivity or whatever. But people understand. Just to illustrate, how many have a high emotional bank account with somebody, a trust relationship with someone, think of that person, that it is so high you can communicate with them almost without words? Can you think of people? How many have such a high emotional bank account that you can even make mistakes in your communication and they'll still get your meaning? Why? They know your heart. They know what you represent. Now the opposite. How many have a relationship with someone that is really strained, where the trust isn't there, where the emotional bank account is overdrawn? How many have had that in your life or now have one of those in your life? Now what happens when you communicate? What happens when you are very clear in your communication? It won't take. They're always looking for the hidden agendas. They're reading between the lines. What's going on here really? And if you make a small mistake, boy, that thing can be blown all out of proportion. Talk about drowning in a puddle. Talk about exacerbating some small little weakness into a major character flaw or something like that. What originally began as just simple misunderstandings are exacerbated until they become major communication breakdowns. Some people even call them personality conflicts. I was doing a seminar one time on the Oregon coastline. It was so beautiful that we actually held our meetings outside. People just wanted to be immersed in this nature. A lovely day, it was warm. One man came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh boy, I wish I could enjoy these things, that I just can't." "What's the problem?" "Well, I don't know, my wife just grills me like you can't believe. I mean, she just doesn't trust me, and she constantly examines every part of my life. Where have you been? What did you do? Who did you go with? What did you do tonight? Who'd you go to dinner with? And who can I call to check up on all this?" And then we talked a little while, and then he said, "Of course, I guess she has good reason for all these misgivings. I mean, I met her when I was on one of these trips when I was married to someone else." And I remember saying to him, "You cannot talk yourself out of problems you behave yourself into. There is no shortcut. There is no quick fix. The law of the harvest governs." Let me share with you a few examples of deposits and withdrawals into the emotional bank account. The first and most important deposit kindness and courtesy. The opposite, of course, would be unkindness and discourtesy. A second deposit, make and keep promises. The opposite of that is don't make promises, or make them and break them. To make and keep a promise essentially lets the other person know you can be counted upon. You're dependable. You will come through. There is no ability like dependability. You gave your word, you kept it. The circumstances changed, you kept it. The mood changed, you kept it. You come through. If the circumstances change to the point that it would be unwise to keep that promise, you immediately communicate and get them to understand those new circumstances so that they will relieve you of the promise. Be very careful before you ever make a promise, particularly if it's about a promise dealing with something that's terribly important to another, that is of jugular importance. Be very careful. The withdrawal is not to make any promises at all, though, because you create no hope. That is a withdrawal as well. Not as big, though, as making one in order to placate someone, to kind of have them be satisfied right now, and then to break it downstream because your mood has changed or the circumstances have altered, or you just don't want to keep it and you just made it because you wanted to please them at the time. Insecure people make promises freely and quickly all of the time. Another very powerful deposit is the way that you manage expectations. You want to make sure that expectations are clear and unambiguous. Some people, particularly if they're rather immature and insecure, will read an expectation as a promise. So you have to be very explicit to manage expectations. If you sense that people implicitly are projecting expectations upon you, sometimes you have to say, let me clarify the expectations so that people, they're at peace. The withdrawal is to have unclear expectations, unidentified expectations, ambiguous expectations, unacknowledged expectations that lie implicit inside people. Our frustrations are a product of our expectations, and we control our expectations. Therefore, we indirectly control our frustration or our satisfaction. Another extremely powerful deposit strikes at such a deep tendency that many of us have, having to do with being a judge. I call this deposit loyalty to the absent. The withdrawal, of course, would be disloyalty and duplicity. Always be loyal to those who are not present. Speak about them as if they were present. If you're critical, the spirit is one of constructive criticism, one of helpfulness or understanding. You see, the moment the two of us sit and badmouth our supervisor here, what do you know I'm doing when there's a strain on our relationship? What am I doing? What do you think I'm doing? Well, if there's a strain in our relationship and I'm talking to him about you, what am I doing?
Doing the same thing.
Exactly. That he and I did about him.
I see.
You see, it is not principle-centered. He knows it. He knows my tendency. So that when we speak about the one who is absent in a way that would show respect for him, even if we're critical of him, but in a constructive, positive way, what does he know I'm saying when visiting with him, who is critical of him? That I would do the same thing. In other words, if you want to retain those who are present, Be loyal to those who are absent. Now, when the sun is shining and you sit and kind of badmouth somebody, it kind of unites you, doesn't it? Kind of cements your relationship, because see, you have a common enemy, as it were, or someone that you both agree on and you can tear into, see? Kind of unites you, and you look for evidence, and then you have breaks and talk about the person, and maybe even have lunch over that person's sins and share each other's stories. Make your mind up. And if you're into team building, if you're into culture building, if you're into family building, make a commitment, everybody. If there's any difficulty with another person, what do? Go directly to the person. You don't talk behind their back. I was failing this one time, complaining to the university president of a university that I was a visiting professor at about his housing director, who had given us such a bad housing situation, contrary to our agreement and expectation. And I was really cutting into the guy, his competency. And the president said, "Stephen, I'm so sorry to hear about this housing situation you're in. The housing director is such a fine, competent person. Why don't we have him come on over here and we'll solve the problem together?" Oh, no. I don't want to be involved. See, I didn't say that because that would be obviously so irresponsible. But, that's how I felt inside. Oh, I don't want to talk to him. I want to talk about him. This president, he just was matter-of-fact and pleasant, and as the gentleman was coming across campus to the president's office, I was going through this internal dialogue. What have I got myself into now? I'm probably responsible for part of the miscommunication. Maybe we got what was agreed. I don't know what the situation is. Honestly, I was so humbled. By the time he arrived there, how are you? Good to see you. The president could see my duplicity. 10 minutes before, what incompetence. There's just no carry through with the original commitment. Then, how are you? A double-minded person is unstable in all his ways. Duplicity. Another major deposit. If you blow any of the above, learn to apologize. The withdrawal is pride. Learn to apologize. I was wrong. That was unkind. I saw my son the other day cutting into his little sister for cleaning up his desk. He had it all organized to do his project. Took him a long time. She came in intending to help her brother and organizes it and cleans it up for him. She thought that was a deposit. See, to him it was a withdrawal. He starts really laying into her, and in the middle of his criticism, he caught himself. Oh, I shouldn't take my frustrations out on you. I'm sorry. I know you meant well. And I watched that and I thought, that takes real presence. That takes real maturity, real respect, a lot of personal security, that he can, in the middle of his anger, take control over it. The ability to apologize, to forget and forgive, to let go of resentment. One of the most liberating and freeing things possible. But it's also an enormous deposit to another person. Let me share with you a few thoughts and challenges to encourage you in the process of developing these habits. One of the most important things you can do is to share these ideas with others, with your family, with your friends and associates. Don't just retell what you've learned, but talk about the insights you've acquired and the ideas that you want to implement. Because that's where the real learning takes place. It is in the teaching and in the sharing. Get with a coach or someone who is also working on these habits. Set a specific time to get together and keep that date. Share insights into what has worked for you and what has not. Discover together how you can overcome the challenges you face in developing all of these habits. Set goals to improve in specific areas. Focus on a single habit. Look over your materials. Read and reflect on how you can improve in this habit. Revisit the commitments you've made to yourself throughout the course. Don't try to change everything all at once. Listen with your heart. Determine those things that are most important for you to work on right now. Remember, don't give up. Be patient. A strong character is not developed overnight. Choose to live your life based upon correct principles. All of the 7 habits are based on universal principles which have endured throughout the ages. Live the habits. Work within your circle of influence and become a transition figure in your work, your community, and your family. Set aside time to go to a quiet place to really think about your mission. What is it you stand for? What is your purpose? What are your values? Keep working through your mission statement until it inspires you. Then live by your mission. Choose to put first things first. Search for a win-win in every situation. Learn to stop and listen to others first. Listen with your heart. Value differences. Look at differences as the springboard to finding the third alternative. Finally, remember to always sharpen the saw, to renew yourself in a very balanced way. The power of these habits is in the doing, in the living, in the continuous day-by-day improvements. It's a constant effort. We need to make these habits and these principles a part of our very life. We must pay the price by actually living them, rather than just understanding them intellectually. I love the quote from T.S. Eliot. Think about this. He once said, "We must never cease from exploring, and the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we began and know the place for the first time." You see, in a very real sense, you already know these habits in your heart. The exciting thing is to embark on a lifelong adventure, an exciting time of literally internalizing them and living them and experiencing the magnificent fruits that come in the totality of our lives.
I hope you've enjoyed watching and learning more about foundational principles of the 7 habits. I recommend that you go back and watch this video several more times because real learning is spaced repetition. I highly recommend that you teach this material to your work associates and to your loved ones so that you will better live these principles. This is what I call the inside-out approach. So if you want to have a happy marriage, be the kind of person who generates positive energy and sidesteps negative energy rather than empowering it. In short, be a light, not a judge, a model, not a critic. If you want to have a more pleasant, cooperative teenager, be a more understanding, empathic, consistent, loving parent. If you want to have more freedom, more latitude in your job, be more responsible, be more helpful, a more contributing employee. If you want to be trusted, be trustworthy. If you want the secondary greatness of recognized talent, focus first on the primary greatness of character. Hence, character and principles are the keys to success, effectiveness, and happiness in life. Principles are the guidelines for human conduct that are proven to have enduring, permanent value. One way to quickly grasp the self-evident nature of principles is to simply consider the absurdity of attempting to live an effective life based on their opposites. I mean, I doubt that anyone would seriously consider unfairness, deceit, baseness, uselessness, mediocrity, or degeneration to be a solid foundation for lasting happiness and success.